Hey everyone, tonight we're diving headfirst into a world where luxury met the utterly bizarre, where banquets were less about eating and more about an immersive, almost hallucinogenic experience. Imagine, if you will, the clinking of golden goblets, the soft murmur of silk, and the scent of exotic spices mingling with something else. Something you've never quite encountered before. You're not just a passive observer here, you're an invited guest, a witness to the most peculiar dining habits of an empire that shone like a diamond for 1,000 years, the Byzantine court. Forget everything you thought you knew about ancient feasts. This wasn't just about satisfying hunger. It was about demonstrating absolute power, divine favor, and a touch of theatrical madness. And honestly, you probably won't survive this level of sensory overload without a nap halfway through. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now in the comments below. And if you like what you hear, make sure to like and follow the channel to keep up with all the strange history we're going to uncover. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on polished marble, the air thick with the scent of frankincense and something faintly metallic. Before you, a sprawling hall, vast and echoing yet strangely intimate due to the sheer density of its decorations. This isn't a humble dining room, it's the triclinium of the Magnora, the grand reception hall of the imperial palace in Constantinople. And yes, you're expected for dinner. The sheer scale of the place is disorienting. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, depicting saints and emperors, casts kaleidoscopic patterns on the floor, shifting like a liquid mosaic with every imperceptible tremor of the ancient city outside. This is your first taste of Byzantine imperial grandeur, and it hits you like a silken sledgehammer. Every surface gleams. Gold leaf is not an accent here. It's practically a structural component. Tapestries so finely woven you'd swear they were painted depict mythical beasts and heroic battles, softening the hard edges of the stone. But it's not just about the bling. There's a profound sense of order and symbolism in every detail. You notice immediately that everything is designed to elevate the emperor, to place him, or occasionally her, not merely at the head of the table, but on a different plane of existence entirely. This wasn't just a meal. It was a carefully choreographed performance, a theological statement, and a dazzling display of wealth and power, all wrapped up in a culinary bow. As you're ushered deeper into the hall, your eyes are drawn to the distant end where a raised dais awaits. That's where the emperor will sit, of course, probably on a throne that makes yours at home look like a repurposed milk crate. But it's not just any throne. This is the fabled throne of Solomon. A mechanical wonder that would have put any modern illusionist to shame. Historians still argue whether the throne truly ascended to the ceiling or merely rose significantly, but the effect was undoubtedly breathtaking. Imagine trying to make polite conversation with your neighbor while the host slowly levitates above you. Talk about an awkward dinner party. The whole experience was designed to overwhelm, to impress upon every visitor, especially foreign dignitaries, the immense power and sophistication of the Byzantine Empire. It was a soft power flex delivered with a side of roasted boar. The tables themselves are not what you might expect. They're often low, and guests would recline on luxurious cushions, a practice inherited from earlier Roman traditions. This isn't your grandma's formal dining room, complete with stiff-backed chairs. This is designed for a kind of languid indulgence, a prolonged experience that was as much about conversation and spectacle as it was about the food. You might find yourself elbow to elbow with a grizzled general one moment, and a velvet-robed eunuch the next. The social hierarchy was strict, yes, but at these feasts everyone was to some extent an audience member in the emperor's grand show. A quirky tidbit that often gets overlooked amidst all this opulence is the lighting. While some feasts would have been held during the day, evening banquets were illuminated not just by countless oil lamps and candles, but often by massive, intricate polycandela. Multi-tiered chandeliers, often made of bronze or silver, that would have cast dancing shadows, adding another layer of theatricality to the scene. Imagine the flickering light on those golden surfaces, the way it would make the mechanical animals shimmer, giving the illusion of life. It's enough to make you feel a little lightheaded even before the wine starts flowing. This was sensory immersion on an imperial scale, a calculated assault on your senses, designed to leave an indelible impression of awe and respect for the host. You're not just eating, you're participating in a carefully crafted illusion of divine authority. And this is just the appetizer course. As you settle deeper into the cushions, the air still humming with the afterimages of imperial grandeur, your attention is inevitably drawn to the true stars of the Magnora, the mock mechanical marvels. This wasn't just a dining hall, it was a living, breathing automaton exhibit, centuries ahead of its time. Forget your grandfather's cuckoo clock, this was an entire orchestra of automatons designed to impress, intimidate, and utterly bewilder. You're not just admiring art, you're witnessing the pinnacle of Byzantine engineering and an almost whimsical understanding of psychological warfare. Right there, flanking the emperor's elevated throne, are the famous golden lions. These aren't just statues. Oh no. With a hidden mechanism, perhaps operated by a hidden court official, or maybe even the emperor himself, with a sly tap of his foot, who knows these magnificent beasts would suddenly roar. Not a polite, almost inaudible growl, mind you, but a full-throated, metallic, and utterly terrifying roar that would reverberate through the hall. Imagine trying to deliver a diplomatic message about trade routes while a golden lion next to you lets out a sound that suggests it might actually devour you. It's enough to make you reconsider your negotiation tactics, isn't it? Historians still argue whether the roars were produced by compressed air bellows or even some form of early pipe organ, but the effect was undeniable, pure, unadulterated shock and awe. But the lions are just the beginning of this automated menagerie. Scattered throughout the hall alongside the guests are golden birds perched on gilded branches. These weren't just pretty ornaments either. At a signal, they would burst into song, a surprisingly realistic chorus of chirps and trills, sometimes accompanied by a synchronized flapping of wings. Picture the scene, the emperor on his ascending throne, golden lions roaring, and a mechanical avian choir serenading the room. It's less a dinner and more a high-tech theme park ride designed to humble mere mortals. You can almost see the gears whirring the tiny bellows, expanding and contracting a hidden world of clockwork artistry beneath the shimmering surfaces. This wasn't just for show, though. The Byzantines, particularly during the Macedonian dynasty, used these mechanical wonders as a key component of their imperial protocol. When foreign envoys came to visit, they weren't just given a formal audience, they were subjected to this elaborate performance. The automatons were a tangible demonstration of Byzantine wealth, technological superiority, and almost divine power. It was a subtle, yet deeply effective way of saying, "Look at what we can do. Imagine what else we're capable of." It made a statement without uttering a single word, speaking volumes through the language of intricate machinery. The sheer ingenuity required to create these devices is mind-boggling. We're talking about a time long before the Industrial Revolution, yet these Byzantine engineers were crafting complex systems of pulleys, levers, and hydraulics. It's a testament to the advanced scientific and mechanical knowledge cultivated within the empire. A quirky tidbit, some accounts suggest that these automatons were occasionally prone to malfunctions. Imagine a lion roaring on cue only for a bird to get stuck mid-flap, or a fountain to sputter rather than flow gracefully. Even imperial technology had its off days, just like your Wi-Fi router. These mechanical marvels were more than just entertainment. They blurred the lines between the natural and the artificial, between the earthly and the divine. The emperor was not just a ruler, He was the master of this enchanted kingdom, capable of bringing golden beasts to life and making birds sing on command. It imbued him with an almost mystical aura, making his presence feel supernatural. You might be here for a meal, but you're also witnessing a carefully constructed illusion of omnipotence served up with a side of mechanical lion. With the mechanical roars of the lions still echoing in your ears and the golden birds momentarily silenced your senses, adjust, and you begin to notice another omnipresent feature of the Magnora, the elaborate water systems. It's not just a few strategically placed fountains. The entire space seems to ripple and murmur with the presence of water, a constant soothing yet deeply impressive backdrop to the imperial feast. You find yourself captivated by the way light plays on the moving surface, turning the very air into a living, shimmering entity. Imagine small, intricate channels running along the floor, sometimes even integrated into the dining tables themselves. These weren't just decorative, they were often functional, delivering a steady supply of cool, fresh water. In the oppressive heat of a Constantinopolitan summer, this would have been a luxurious necessity. But beyond mere refreshment, these water features were a vital part of the court's theatrical display. Small gilded fish might swim in the channels, or even mechanical birds, yes. More automatons would dip their beaks into the flowing water, creating a perpetual motion of life and tranquility. It's the ancient equivalent of a high-end restaurant with a waterfall feature, but dialed up to 11. One of the most remarkable aspects of these water systems was their complexity. The Byzantines were masters of etiquette hydraulics, inheriting much of their knowledge from Roman engineering but pushing it further. Aqueducts brought fresh water from miles away to the capital, and within the palace it was then channeled through a network of pipes and conduits to feed these elaborate displays. It wasn't just about the beauty, it was about showcasing the empire's ability to control and manipulate natural resources on a grand scale. A quirk of this system, sometimes noted in historical accounts, is the ingenious way wastewater was then channeled away, often into subterranean cisterns or even directly back into the city's drainage system. A very early form of sustainable water management, though perhaps less glamorous than the Golden Lions. These water features also served a practical purpose beyond mere aesthetics and hydration. In a society where hygiene was valued, albeit differently than today, flowing water was a symbol of purity and cleanliness. Guests might even have used small basins fed by these channels for washing their hands during the lengthy banquets. Historians still argue whether the water was purely ornamental or if it was also used for cooling the air through evaporation, creating an early form of air conditioning. Given the ingenuity seen elsewhere, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility. The sound of the water, a gentle splashing and murmuring, would have blended with the hushed conversations, the distant music, and the occasional whirring of automatons, creating a multi-sensory experience designed to fully immerse the guests. It's a subtle form of luxury that often goes unmentioned when people focus on the more obvious gold and jewels, but its impact on the atmosphere would have been profound. It provided a sense of calm and natural beauty amidst the otherwise overwhelming opulence. So as you recline, listening to the gentle flow, you realize that every element in this hall, from the roaring lions to the shimmering water, is part of a grand design. It's a testament to Byzantine innovation, a blend of engineering prowess, artistic vision, and imperial propaganda. You're not just at dinner. You're inside a meticulously crafted living diorama of power and prestige, refreshed by streams that seem to flow directly from the emperor's boundless influence. It's enough to make you thirsty, which is convenient, since there's water practically everywhere you look. Just don't try to fill your glass from the lion's mouth. Probably not sanitary. Having absorbed the sights and sounds of the Magnora's mechanical wonders and shimmering water features, your senses are now primed for the main event, the food itself. And what food it is. As the first dishes begin to arrive, carried by silent robed attendants, you realize this isn't just a meal. It's a global culinary tour. The Byzantine court's pantry was quite literally the world thanks to its strategic location at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. We're talking about exotic imports on a scale that would make a modern-day gourmet grocer blush with envy. Imagine spices from the Far East, silks from China, and the tantalizing aromas that promised a feast unlike any other. The empire controlled vital trade routes, making Constantinople the ultimate hub for every conceivable luxury. So while you might expect lamb or fish, which don't worry, you'll get plenty of, you're also about to encounter ingredients that had traveled thousands of miles. This isn't just good eating, it's edible geopolitics. Each ingredient tells a story of trade power and the vast reach of the Byzantine mercantile fleet. Consider the humble harki, pepper tea. Today it's a staple in every kitchen, but in the Byzantine era, black pepper from India was a rare and precious commodity, often worth its weight in silver, sometimes even gold. You'll find it generously sprinkled on savory dishes, not just for heat, but as a potent symbol of wealth. Then there's cheese cinnamon shapwas defnon from Sri Lanka, or what was then called tapperbane. Its sweet, woody aroma weaving through desserts and even some meat dishes. And don't forget, cloves. Tiny, potent buds from the Moluccas, lending their distinct pungency to sauces and stews. These weren't just flavor enhancers, they were currency status symbols and occasionally even preservatives. Historians still argue whether the demand for these exotic spices significantly contributed to the initial push for European exploration centuries later, but it's clear the Byzantines were way ahead of the curve in their culinary globalism. But it wasn't just spices. Picture shaks, citrus fruits. Like oranges and lemons, which were slowly making their way into the Mediterranean world, valued not only for their flavor, but for their perceived medicinal properties. Dates and figs, dried and preserved, arrived from the sun-drenched lands of the Near East, adding intense sweetness to confectionery. And from the colder climes, perhaps even from the distant Russ's lands, might come specific types of honey, or even rare furs that found their way into the opulent display, if not the actual meal. It was a veritable United Nations of ingredients. A quirky tidbit: some accounts suggest that certain ingredients were so precious they might have been served almost as individual curiosities, presented on their own small gilded dishes, rather than simply incorporated into a larger stew. Imagine being served a single perfect date from Palmyra, or a small handful of just cracked pistachios from Persia, each one a tiny edible jewel. This wasn't about volume. It was about the rare, the exceptional, the "you probably won't see this again outside of this palace" factor. The court chefs, often drawing on ancient Roman traditions, but significantly influenced by Persian and Arab culinary practices, would have skillfully blended these diverse elements. They weren't afraid to combine sweet and savory, or to use strong, pungent flavors alongside delicate ones. The result was a complex tapestry of taste that was both familiar and utterly alien to a modern palate. You're about to experience a true fusion cuisine millennia before the term was even invented. It's a testament to the empire's reach and its chefs' daring. Just try not to ask where they sourced the crocodile dung sunscreen. That's a story for another time, thankfully unrelated to tonight's menu. With the tantalizing aromas of globally sourced ingredients now permeating the air, your gaze shifts from the raw exoticism of the pantry to the theatricality of its presentation. The Byzantines didn't just cook, they choreographed edible spectacles. And among the most visually stunning, perhaps even a little absurd, were the pain de peacock feasts. Champonim. This wasn't just about a nicely roasted bird, it was about art illusion and a healthy dose of "look what we can do." Imagine, if you will, a roasted peacock meticulously prepared. But then here's the magic. Its vibrant iridescent plumage is carefully reattached to the cooked carcass. It's then presented on a grand platter, often gilded, making it appear as if the bird has simply dozed off mid-strut. The tail feathers fan out in a dazzling display of blues, greens, and golds catching the light from the polycandela and shimmering like a living jewel. This wasn't just dinner, it was a conversation piece, a centerpiece so magnificent it almost felt wrong to eat it. Almost. The skill required for such a presentation was immense. It wasn't merely about plucking and roasting. It was about preserving the delicate feathers, creating a support structure for them, and then reassembling the whole glorious show. It was a fusion of culinary art and taxidermy, a very high-stakes game of make the bird look alive again. Historians still argue whether the peacock itself was always consumed, or if sometimes these were purely ornamental, only for display. Given the cost and effort, it's likely they were eventually carved and served, but the initial impact was undeniably visual. But why peacocks beyond their undeniable beauty? Peacocks held symbolic significance. They were often associated with immortality and divine splendor, making them a fitting dish for an emperor who considered himself God's chosen representative on earth. Serving a peacock was not just about providing a meal. It was about reinforcing the imperial narrative, subtly reminding everyone of the emperor's elevated status and the divine favor bestowed upon his reign. It was food as propaganda dressed in iridescent feathers. A quirky tidbit, while peacocks were the most famous, other large birds like pheasants, or even swans if available, and not too grumpy, might have been given similar elaborate presentations. The goal was always to create a sense of awe and wonder, to transform a simple act of eating into a memorable, almost mythical event. Imagine the hush that would fall over the hall as such a dish was carried in the collective gasp of guests witnessing this feathered marvel. It's a bit like seeing a perfectly plated dish today, but amplified by 1,000 years of expectation and the lack of social media to spoil the surprise. So, as you gaze upon this feathered masterpiece, you can almost hear the soft whispers of admiration, the hushed comments of awe. It's a reminder that in the Byzantine court, even the simplest act of serving a meal was elevated to an art form, a theatrical performance designed to impress, entertain, and subtly convey the immense power and sophistication of the host. You might be here to eat, but you're definitely being fed a generous helping of imperial spectacle. Just try not to get a feather in your teeth. The visual feast of the reassembled peacock slowly begins to yield to another fascinating aspect of Byzantine dining, the concept of living tables and edible decorations. This wasn't just about placing a vase of flowers in the center. It was about blurring the lines between centerpiece and sustenance, turning the very table into a consumable landscape. You're not just looking at a meal. You're looking at an entire edible tableau, a temporary work of art designed to delight and then disappear. Imagine platters piled high with glistening fruits arranged not haphazardly, but in intricate patterns, pyramids of pomegranates, mosaics of figs and dates, each piece perfectly placed to form a larger design. These weren't just for snacking. They were integral to the aesthetic, creating a sense of natural abundance and horticultural mastery. Sometimes these fruit displays would be interspersed with small decorative pastries or intricately carved vegetables, adding another layer of artistry to the edible landscape. It's like a medieval version of a charcuterie board, taken to an extreme where every element contributes to a grand transient masterpiece. Beyond the fruits, there are accounts of more elaborate edible constructions. Think miniature sugar sculptures, perhaps depicting mythical creatures, or even tiny versions of the imperial palace itself, crafted with painstaking detail. These would have been incredibly labor-intensive, requiring not just culinary skill, but also a sculptor's touch. The fleeting nature of such creations, destined to be admired for a short time and then consumed, speaks volumes about the Byzantines' willingness to invest immense resources in temporary displays of luxury. Historians still argue whether these sugar sculptures were truly edible or primarily for show, but the consensus leans towards them being at least theoretically consumable, if perhaps a bit tooth-chipping. A quirky tidbit that often goes overlooked is the use of bread as a decorative element. While we'll talk more about bread later here, it's about its presentation. Elaborate loaves twisted into complex braids or shaped into animal forms might have adorned the table, perhaps even serving as edible vessels for other dishes. Imagine breaking off a piece of a lion-shaped bread loaf before scooping up a stew from its hollowed-out back. It's practical, playful, and incredibly impressive all at once. The idea behind these living tables was multifaceted. Firstly, it reinforced the theme of abundance and the emperor's ability to command vast resources, both natural and human. Secondly, it added another layer to the sensory experience, engaging sight, smell, and eventually taste in a continuous flow. And thirdly, it showcased the artistic talent of the court's numerous artisans, from master bakers to confectioners, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to bring these grand visions to life. You might find yourself debating whether to admire the artistry or simply dig in. So as you reach for a plump, glistening grape from a carefully constructed pyramid, you're not just reaching for food. You're dismantling a temporary masterpiece, participating in a tradition where every meal was a performance and every edible element was a brushstroke in a grand, fleeting painting. It's a deliciously decadent way to dine, reminding you that even the simplest act of eating could be transformed into an opulent display of imperial power and creativity. Just don't feel too bad about messing up the arrangement. It was designed to be devoured. As your eyes drift from the artfully arranged edible decorations, your nose takes over, drawing your attention to the true olfactory backbone of Byzantine cuisine: spices. This isn't just a dash of salt and pepper. This is an aromatic symphony, a complex layering of potent fragrances that tells a story of global trade medicinal belief and a culinary philosophy entirely distinct from our own. The air itself seems to hum with the essence of distant lands. We touched on exotic imports earlier, but now let's really lean into the significant role of these precious powders and barks. Spices weren't merely flavor enhancers, they were considered vital for health, digestion, and even as aphrodisiacs. Byzantine medical texts, heavily influenced by ancient Greek and Roman humoral theory, often prescribed certain spices for specific ailments or to balance the body's humors. So that heavily spiced stew you're about to try isn't just delicious, it's practically medicine. You're getting your daily dose of wellness with a side of exotic kick. Think of bay saffron. The golden threads derived from crocus flowers. Imported from places like Persia or even parts of Anatolia, it was incredibly expensive, used not just for its subtle, unique flavor, but also for its vibrant color, turning rice and sauces into dazzling shades of yellow. It was believed to uplift the spirits and aid digestion. Then there's jatkin, nutmeg, chantiend po mesmar, sisters from the same fruit arriving from the Spice Islands. Their warm, earthy notes would have graced both savory and sweet dishes, often believed to strengthen the stomach and invigorate the mind. And let's not forget ginger. Whether fresh or dried, brought along the Silk Roads. Its pungent, peppery kick was a favorite used in everything from meat marinades to refreshing drinks. It was highly valued for its warming properties, particularly during colder months. A quirky tidbit ginger was sometimes even candied and served as a sweet, fiery confection, a sort of ancient predecessor to ginger chews. Imagine that fiery burst after a rich meal. The generous use of spices also served a practical purpose in an era before refrigeration. While not a true preservative in the modern sense, many spices possess antimicrobial properties that could help inhibit spoilage, especially in warmer climates. They could also mask less than perfect freshness, a polite way of saying they made questionable ingredients taste well less questionable. Historians still argue whether this masking effect was a primary driver for their widespread use or merely a happy side effect of their desirable flavors. The chefs of the Byzantine court were masters of blending these powerful aromatics, often creating complex spice mixes known as condita. These mixtures, akin to modern curry powders or ras el hanout, would be prepared in advance and added to dishes, creating layers of flavor that would slowly unfold on the palate. You'd taste the initial warmth of pepper, followed by the sweetness of cinnamon, and then a lingering hint of something earthy like cumin or coriander. It was a sophisticated dance of flavors designed to intrigue and satisfy. So, as the aromatic steam rises from the approaching dishes, inhale deeply. You're not just smelling dinner, you're inhaling centuries of global trade, ancient medical wisdom, and a culinary tradition that embraced boldness and complexity. It's an intoxicating invitation to dive into a truly unique taste experience where every bite is a journey through a spice merchant's dream. With your senses now fully engaged by the heady aromas of exotic spices, a new sweeter note begins to drift through the air, signaling the arrival of a distinct and deeply cherished category of Byzantine delights: honeyed dreams and sweet indulgences. If you thought the Byzantines were all about savory grandeur, prepare for a delightful surprise. Their love for sweetness was profound, deeply ingrained, and often showcased with as much artistry as their savory counterparts. The primary sweetener almost universally was honey. Sugar as we know it from sugar cane or beets was extremely rare and exorbitantly expensive, a true luxury imported in tiny quantities, often for medicinal purposes or the most extravagant imperial displays. Honey, on the other hand, was abundant sourced from the empire's vast lands and meticulously cultivated by beekeepers. It wasn't just a sweetener, it was a flavor in itself, with notes varying depending on the flowers the bees visited, from light floral essences to darker, more robust profiles. You're about to taste honey not just as an additive, but as a star ingredient. Imagine delicate pastries often made with thin, crisp layers of dough, an early form of baklava, perhaps drenched in warm, spiced honey syrup. These weren't just simple cakes, they were intricate creations, sometimes filled with finely chopped nuts, like walnuts or almonds, often ground into a paste. The combination of crisp pastry, sticky aromatic honey, and crunchy nuts would have been a textural and taste sensation, a real treat for the imperial palate. A quirky tidbit: some of these pastries were shaped into elaborate forms, mimicking animals or symbolic objects, further blurring the line between food and art. Beyond pastries, honey found its way into a variety of other sweet dishes. You might encounter shaboni, candied fruits, where plums, cherries, or apricots were preserved in thick honey syrup, creating glistening, intensely sweet morsels. These would have been perfect for palate cleansers or as a light dessert after a heavy meal. There were also various forms of hirdi, puddings, and custards, often thickened with eggs or grain and liberally sweetened with honey, perhaps flavored with rose water or orange blossom water for an extra touch of perfume. The emphasis on honey also ties back to the Byzantine understanding of health and well-being. Honey was revered for its medicinal properties, believed to be beneficial for digestion, soothing for the throat, and generally invigorating. So indulging in these sweet treats wasn't just about pleasure, it was also subtly justified by perceived health benefits. Historians still argue whether the Byzantines considered these desserts as mere afterthoughts or as equally important components of a grand feast, but their consistent presence and elaborate preparation suggest a deep appreciation. As the trays laden with these golden glistening confections approach, you notice the delicate balance of sweetness with other flavors. Sometimes a hint of cinnamon or clove, a touch of lemon zest, or the perfumed floral notes from rosewater would cut through the richness of the honey, preventing it from being cloyingly sweet. It's a sophisticated use of flavors, showcasing the pastry chef's mastery. So lean back and prepare for a wave of pure golden sweetness. These aren't just desserts. They're echoes of an ancient love affair with nature's purest sweetener, crafted into delights that speak of indulgence, artistry, and a healthy dose of Byzantine delight. Just try not to get too sticky. This is an imperial banquet after all. With the sweetness of honeyed pastries still lingering on your tongue, it's time to move to another essential component of any Byzantine feast, the fermented favorites and ancient brews. This wasn't a teetotaling court, far from it. Beverages, particularly alcoholic ones, played a significant role not just for refreshment, but for social lubrication ritual, and sometimes just plain enjoyment. You're about to discover that Byzantine libations were as diverse and intriguing as their food. The undisputed king of drinks at the imperial court, as in much of the Mediterranean world, was wine. Byzantine vineyards, particularly those around the Aegean Islands and the fertile lands of Anatolia, produced a wide variety of wines. These weren't necessarily the refined, subtly aged vintages we associate with modern winemaking. Byzantine wines were often strong, sometimes resinous. Think Retsina, but perhaps even more pronounced and frequently spiced. Imagine a robust red, perhaps sweetened with honey or spiced with cinnamon, cloves, and even pepper, creating a sort of mulled wine long before the Christmas market trend. These condita wines, as they were known, were popular and considered beneficial for digestion. The wine was rarely drunk neat, especially during feasts. It was almost always diluted with water. A practice dating back to ancient Greece and Rome. To drink undiluted wine was considered uncivilized, a sign of barbarism. The ratio of water to wine varied, but it could be as much as 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part wine. This not only made the wine last longer, but also allowed for more prolonged drinking without quickly succumbing to intoxication, which was important for maintaining decorum mostly at long imperial banquets. Historians still argue whether the practice of diluting wine was purely for civility or also due to the potency and less refined taste of some ancient wines. Beyond wine, there were other fermented beverages. While not as extensively documented in the imperial context, it's safe to assume that beer pohas would have been consumed by some, particularly those from the northern regions, or visitors from lands where grape cultivation was less common. However, it was generally considered a drink of the common people, or barbarians, by the more wine-focused Byzantines. You're unlikely to see the emperor chugging a pint, but some of the lower-ranking guests or servants might have had access to it. A quirky tidbit: some accounts mention the production of hot fruit ciders, or meads, fermented honey drinks. These would have offered alternatives to grape wine, particularly in regions where specific fruits were abundant. Imagine a sparkling apple cider, perhaps, with a hint of honey, a refreshing contrast to the often heavy and spiced wines. These diverse options reflect a sophisticated understanding of fermentation and a desire to provide a variety of choices, even if wine reigned supreme. The vessels for drinking were also a spectacle. While the emperor and his closest circle would drink from magnificent golden or silver goblets, often encrusted with jewels, other guests would use finely crafted ceramic or glass cups. The ritual of pouring, the clinking of vessels, and the communal act of sharing a drink would have been an integral part of the feast's social fabric. It fostered a sense of camaraderie even amidst the strict imperial hierarchy. So, as a cupbearer approaches with a pitcher likely filled with a deep red, possibly spiced and certainly diluted wine, take a moment to appreciate the history in your goblet. You're partaking in a tradition that stretches back millennia, a blend of refreshment ritual and a hearty dose of fermented history. Just remember, pace yourself. These Byzantine banquets are marathon, not a sprint. Having savored the spiced wines and honeyed treats, your palate is now ready for a significant aspect of Byzantine imperial dining, one dictated not by opulence but by piety, the fishy business of Lenten feasts. The Byzantine Empire was deeply Christian, and adherence to religious observance, particularly fasting, was a cornerstone of both personal faith and imperial policy. This meant that for significant portions of the year, meat and dairy were off the menu. But don't imagine bland, penitent meals. The Byzantine court turned Lenten restrictions into an opportunity for culinary ingenuity, elevating fish to an art form. During periods like Great Lent before Easter or the Nativity Fast before Christmas, the imperial kitchen didn't just scale back, it pivoted. Instead of roasted meats and rich stews, you'd be presented with an astonishing variety of aquatic delights. This wasn't just about survival, it was about showcasing the empire's ability to provide luxurious sustenance, even within the bounds of religious law. You're about to witness how faith could inspire some truly spectacular seafood dishes. Imagine platters laden with fresh fish. From the Bosphorus, the Black Sea, and the Aegean, gleaming silver mullets, succulent sea bream, delicate sole, and robust tuna. These would be prepared in countless ways, grilled over open flames, poached in aromatic broths, baked with herbs and lemon, or even served in elaborate fish stews rich with vegetables and olive oil. The emphasis was on freshness and flavor, allowing the natural taste of the fish to shine, often enhanced by the ubiquitous spices we've already discussed. Beyond fresh fish, the Byzantines were masters of preserved seafood. Salted and dried cod, often imported from distant northern lands, would be rehydrated and transformed into hearty stews. Smoked fish, too, would feature prominently, offering a different texture and depth of flavor. And then there were the shellfish. Mussels, clams, oysters, and shrimp, often served simply steamed or incorporated into more complex dishes. Historians still argue whether certain types of shellfish were considered meat or fish by all Byzantine theologians, leading to some lively debates about Lenten legality at the dinner table. A quirky tidbit, one particular delicacy, was garum. That pungent fermented fish sauce we'll delve into later, but for Lenten meals a lighter fish-based version might have been used, or perhaps a sauce made from fish roe. Fish roe, in fact, was a prized ingredient sometimes pressed and dried into a form similar to modern botarga, offering an intense burst of briny flavor. Imagine thin slices of this savory, umami-rich delicacy served with a drizzle of olive oil. The preparation of these Lenten feasts required incredible skill and creativity from the imperial chefs. They had to ensure variety and richness without relying on the forbidden ingredients. This often led to a greater reliance on olive oil herbs, vegetables pulses like lentils and chickpeas, and of course the spices from the East. The result was a surprisingly diverse and often incredibly flavorful cuisine, proving that dietary restrictions can sometimes be the mother of culinary invention. So, as a plate of perfectly grilled sea bass, perhaps adorned with fresh dill and a squeeze of lemon, is placed before you, take a moment to appreciate the piety and ingenuity behind it. This isn't just a meal, it's a demonstration of faith, a culinary challenge met with unparalleled skill, and a delicious testament to the Byzantine court's ability to feast even when fasting. It reminds you that sometimes the strangest feasts are those born from profound belief. Having navigated the surprisingly rich waters of Lenten fish feasts, your palate now shifts to the robust and earthy flavors of the imperial hunt, game on, and hunted delicacies. While fish provided the ritualistic sustenance, wild game offered a direct connection to the land, to imperial sport, and to a primal, often masculine display of power. These weren't just meals, they were trophies on a platter, symbolizing the emperor's dominion over nature itself. The vast hunting reserves and forests surrounding Constantinople, and indeed throughout the empire, teemed with various species that would eventually find their way to the imperial table. Think of the mighty wild boar. Its lean, dark meat, a prized delicacy. Boar hunts were dangerous, thrilling affairs, often led by the emperor himself, showcasing his prowess and courage. The meat once brought back to the palace kitchens would be roasted whole on spits, its skin crackling and glistening, or cut into robust stews, often heavily spiced with pepper, juniper berries, and wild herbs. It's a dish that speaks of raw power and ancient traditions. Then there was venison meat from various deer species, which would have offered a more delicate yet still distinct flavor profile. Roasts of venison, perhaps marinated in wine and herbs, would have been common, often served with rich sauces. Smaller game birds like pheasants, partridges, and quails would also grace the table. These would be roasted, grilled, or even incorporated into elaborate pies, offering a variety of textures and flavors. Imagine a small, perfectly roasted quail presented on a bed of seasoned grains, its rich aroma filling the air. The preparation of game often involved specific techniques to tenderize the meat, which could be tougher than farmed animals. Marinating in wine vinegar or brines was common, as was slow cooking over low heat for extended periods. Spices once again played a crucial role, not just for flavor, but to mitigate any gamey taste that might be considered too strong for the imperial palate. A quirky tidbit: some sources suggest that certain game animals, especially birds, might have been cooked, and then, much like the peacock, redressed with their feathers for an initial visual spectacle before carving. It seems the Byzantines truly loved their feathered props. Hunting wasn't just a sport, it was a significant aspect of imperial culture and a form of diplomatic entertainment. Foreign dignitaries might be invited to participate in a hunt, cementing alliances and demonstrating the emperor's physical prowess. The resulting feast, featuring the very animals they had hunted, would then become a celebration of shared experience and imperial hospitality. Historians still debate the extent to which actual hunting contributed to the imperial diet versus animals acquired through other means, but the symbolic importance of the hunt remained paramount. So, as a robust cut of roasted boar, perhaps with a rich dark sauce, is placed before you, consider the journey it took from the wild forests to this opulent table. It's a taste of the untamed, brought under imperial control and transformed into a feast fit for the most powerful ruler in the Christian world. It speaks of strength, tradition, and a hearty appetite for both adventure and delicious wild meat. Just be careful with those bone fragments. They're not nearly as refined as the golden tableware. You've seen the dazzling displays, tasted the exotic imports, and explored the nuances of imperial dining. But now let's peel back the curtain and peek behind the scenes into the veritable beehive of activity that was the imperial kitchen, behind the scenes. This wasn't just a kitchen, it was an industrial-scale operation, a culinary factory employing scores, perhaps hundreds of individuals, all working in a synchronized dance to feed an emperor his court and a never-ending stream of guests. You're about to appreciate the sheer logistical mastery required to pull off such feasts. Imagine vast complexes of stone buildings, perhaps a little further from the main palace halls, to keep the noise, heat, and smells at bay. Inside, the air would be thick with the aroma of roasting meat, simmering sauces, and freshly baked bread, mingled with the earthy scent of wood smoke from countless hearths and ovens. This wasn't a single room. It was a labyrinth of specialized areas. There would be separate sections for butchering, for baking, for preparing vegetables, for making sweets, and for boiling and roasting. Each area would have its own team overseen by master chefs, who were less cooks and more highly skilled managers and artists. The hierarchy within these kitchens was as strict as in any other part of the Byzantine court. At the top was the pontitos protovestiarios, or a similar high-ranking official who would oversee the palace economy, including the provisions for the kitchen. Below them were the master chefs, or magiroi, who were highly respected, often well-paid, and sometimes even influential figures. Then came the legions of specialized cooks, the artopoioi, bakers, the opsonopoioi. Fish, cooks the kriatopoioi, meat, cooks the glycopoioi, sweet makers, and many more. And beneath them a vast army of scullery maids, porters, fire-stokers, and general assistants. It was a well-oiled machine, albeit one powered by human sweat and ingenuity. The logistics of sourcing ingredients alone would have been a monumental task. We've already discussed the exotic imports, but even local produce, fresh meats, and daily deliveries of milk and eggs required a sophisticated supply chain. Imagine a constant flow of carts arriving at the palace gates laden with goods from the surrounding countryside, from fishing fleets, and from merchant ships docked in the Golden Horn. It was a 24/7 operation, ensuring that the imperial larder was always stocked with the finest and freshest available. Historians still argue about the exact number of staff employed in the imperial kitchens at any given time, but estimates range into the hundreds, making it one of the largest food service operations of its era. A quirky tidbit, the kitchens would have been incredibly hot and smoky. While some ventilation was certainly in place, imagine working over open fires and in stone ovens for hours on end without the benefit of modern climate control. It was a grueling, physically demanding environment, a stark contrast to the refined elegance of the dining halls the food was destined for. Yet the precision and quality of the output rarely wavered, a testament to the discipline and skill of the kitchen staff. So as you picture the steaming cauldrons, the bustling bakers kneading dough, and the meticulous preparation of ingredients, remember that the seemingly effortless grandeur of the Byzantine feast was built upon the tireless work of this vast unseen army. It was here in these smoky, chaotic, yet incredibly efficient kitchens that the empire's culinary dreams were forged, transforming raw ingredients into the strange and spectacular dishes that graced the imperial table. It makes you almost feel guilty for just sitting there and eating, doesn't it? Almost. Having glimpsed the bustling, sweaty, and highly efficient engine room that was the imperial kitchen, we now return to the refined, almost theatrical stage of the dining hall, where the culmination of all that unseen labor unfolds. Here, mere eating transcends into a meticulously choreographed performance governed by a rigid culinary hierarchy and serving protocol. This wasn't just about getting food to mouths. It was about defining social order, reinforcing imperial power, and ensuring that every sip and bite happened according to an ancient, precise script. Imagine the atmosphere as the first dishes arrive. It's not a free-for-all buffet, nor is it a casual family dinner. Instead, a procession of silent-robed servants, often eunuchs, known for their reliability and closeness to the emperor, carries the dishes. Their movements are precise, almost balletic, each knowing their exact place and moment. The serving order is paramount. The most exquisite dishes presented on the most elaborate platters would first be brought before the emperor. He might select a portion, or more likely, simply acknowledge it before it was then presented to the highest-ranking officials, then gradually down the social ladder. You're not just eating. You're witnessing a living diagram of power and prestige. The emperor himself rarely, if ever, ate alone. Even if he was the central figure, his dining was usually a public act, observed by those present. This public display of eating, along with the strict protocol, served to reinforce his exalted status. He was the sun around which all other planets revolved, even at mealtime. Historians still argue about the precise details of daily imperial meals versus grand banquets, but the general principle of hierarchical service remained constant. Beyond the order of serving, the very act of eating was governed by etiquette. Guests were expected to maintain a certain decorum, to eat with restraint, and to observe the emperor's actions. While forks, as we know them, were a later rare introduction, and likely considered an Italian affectation by some conservative Byzantines, most eating was done with knives, spoons, or by hand. Bowls and platters would be shared communally among groups of guests, but the choicest morsels would always gravitate towards the higher ranks. A quirky tidbit, sometimes the emperor might send a special portion of a dish from his own table to a favored guest, a significant gesture of honor and favor that could make or break a career. Imagine the tension as everyone watches to see who gets the imperial nod and the extra leg of lamb. The sheer number of people involved in serving was astounding. Beyond the immediate servers bringing the dishes, there were cupbearers, often young, handsome individuals who managed the wine and water, ensuring everyone's goblet was appropriately filled and diluted. There were tasters ensuring the food wasn't poisoned, a not unfounded fear in courtly life. There were attendants to clear dishes, and others simply to stand in attendance, ready to anticipate any need. It was a well-oiled machine of attentiveness, all designed to make the imperial dining experience seamless and supremely comfortable, at least for the emperor. So, as a server approaches your section of the table, holding a steaming platter aloft, observe the silent precision of their movements, the almost reverential way they present the food. You're not just being served a meal, you're being served a lesson in Byzantine social structure, a living, breathing testament to the power of protocol, where even a mouthful of food is steeped in tradition and hierarchy. Just try not to make eye contact with the emperor's food taster. It's probably bad form. Having witnessed the intricate dance of serving protocol and the silent language of hierarchy at the imperial table, let's now turn our attention to the unsung hero of almost every meal, imperial or otherwise, bread. For the Byzantines, bread wasn't just a side dish, it was the staff of life, deeply symbolic and produced in an astonishing variety by the padas, imperial bakers, bread's importance. Chaptunt. You're about to discover that even something as fundamental as bread could be elevated to an art form in the Byzantine court. The imperial bakeries, often vast separate complexes within the palace grounds or nearby, would have been bustling hubs of activity from before dawn. Grains sourced from the empire's fertile lands, Egypt and Anatolia being particularly significant, would arrive, be milled, and then transformed by skilled artopoioi, master bakers. This wasn't just about cranking out simple loaves. It was about producing a range of breads to suit every palate occasion and social standing, from the simplest hearty sustenance to incredibly elaborate decorated confections. Imagine the sheer variety. There would have been porky, common bread, the daily staple, likely a coarser whole-grain loaf for the general court. But for the imperial table, finer flours were used, creating lighter, whiter breads, a sign of luxury and refinement. These might be simple round loaves, perfectly risen and golden brown. But then there were the specialty breads. Some were enriched with olive oil milk or eggs, making them softer and richer. Others might be flavored with herbs like oregano or thyme, or even spices like anise or fennel seeds, adding aromatic complexity. A particularly fascinating aspect was the decorative bread. As we touched upon earlier, bread wasn't just sustenance, it was often part of the edible decoration. Bakers would shape dough into intricate braids, symbolic animals, perhaps miniature golden lions, to match the automatons, or even stylized depictions of Christian symbols. These would often be glazed to a high sheen, perhaps even dusted with groundnuts or fragrant seeds, making them almost too beautiful to eat. Historians still argue whether some of these highly decorative breads were consumed or merely displayed for their symbolic value, but the skill involved in their creation is undeniable. The act of breaking bread held deep symbolic meaning in Byzantine society, particularly within the Christian context. It represented community hospitality and shared sustenance. At imperial feasts, the presentation of bread would have been dignified, perhaps even ritualistic, underscoring its foundational role in the meal and its connection to both earthly provision and divine blessing. A quirky tidbit, some accounts suggest that special highly decorated loaves were sometimes presented as gifts or offerings either to visiting dignitaries or even to the church, further cementing bread's elevated status beyond simple food. The sound of the imperial bakery would have been constant, the rhythmic thud of kneading dough, the soft crackle of burning wood in the ovens, the clatter of baking pans. It was a place of warmth and industry, producing the very foundation upon which all the more exotic and theatrical dishes were built. Without these skilled bakers, even the most extravagant peacock feast would have felt incomplete. So, as a freshly baked, perhaps still warm loaf is presented perfectly crusty on the outside and soft within, take a moment to appreciate the unsung heroes of the imperial kitchen. This isn't just flour and water. It's the result of ancient agricultural traditions, masterful baking techniques, and a profound respect for the most fundamental of foods elevated to imperial standards. It's a testament to the Byzantines' ability to turn the essential into the extraordinary. Just try not to get too many crumbs on your velvet tunic. From the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, our journey through the strange Byzantine feast takes a surprisingly tart turn, revealing a key ingredient that permeated much of their cuisine: vinegar's edge and sour notes. While we've discussed sweet honey and pungent spices, the Byzantines also had a profound appreciation for acidity, using vinegar not just as a condiment, but as a vital component in countless dishes, both for flavor and practical reasons. You're about to discover that a little sourness was essential for a truly balanced imperial meal. Vinegar, or oxos as it was known, was ubiquitous. Produced primarily from fermented wine, it varied in strength and flavor depending on the quality of the wine and the length of fermentation. Unlike today, where we might limit ourselves to balsamic or apple cider vinegar, the Byzantines would have had access to a range of vinegars, some perhaps infused with herbs or even fruit. This wasn't just for salads, it was woven into the very fabric of their cooking. Its primary role was multifaceted. Firstly, flavor. The sharp tang of vinegar could cut through the richness of fatty meats, brighten heavy sauces, and add a refreshing counterpoint to sweet elements. Imagine a hearty stew, otherwise robust with spices and game meat, suddenly lifted by a splash of tangy vinegar at the end of cooking. It provided that zing that balanced out the other strong flavors. Historians still argue about the precise balance of flavors in Byzantine cuisine, but the prevalence of vinegar in surviving culinary fragments suggests a palate that embraced sourness alongside richness. Secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, preservation. In an era before refrigeration, vinegar was a crucial tool for extending the shelf life of food. Meats could be pickled in vinegar, vegetables could be brined, and sauces could be made more stable. Think of pickled fish, a common way to preserve catches for longer periods, or even vegetables like cucumbers or cabbage preserved in a sour brine. This wasn't just about taste, it was about ensuring a continuous supply of food, especially for a large court that needed to be fed consistently. A quirky tidbit, some accounts even suggest that water could be freshened with a small amount of vinegar, especially on long journeys, making it safer to drink and improving its taste. Vinegar also played a role in Byzantine medicine, often being prescribed for various ailments or used as a base for medicinal concoctions. Its antiseptic properties were recognized even if the scientific understanding behind it wasn't fully developed. So that sour kick in your stew might have been considered a beneficial tonic. As dishes arrive, you might notice a subtle yet distinct sour undertone in a rich meat dish or a sharp, invigorating dressing on a plate of greens. It's a flavor that might initially surprise a modern palate accustomed to more uniformly sweet or savory profiles, but it's a taste that speaks to a sophisticated understanding of balance and a practical approach to food preparation. The Byzantines weren't afraid of a little pucker. So, as you take a bite of something unexpectedly tart, perhaps a piece of meat with a glistening vinegary sauce, appreciate this often overlooked element of Byzantine cuisine. It's a testament to their resourcefulness, their love of complex flavors, and their pragmatic approach to feeding an empire. Just try not to make too sour a face. It might be seen as an insult to the imperial chef. From the sharp, bracing tang of vinegar, we now plunge into perhaps the most controversial and undeniably pungent cornerstone of ancient and Byzantine culinary practices: garam's funk, the fermented sauces. This isn't for the faint of heart or nose. Garum, a fermented fish sauce, was the umami bomb of the ancient world, a staple condiment that permeated virtually every aspect of cooking, from the humble kitchen to the grand imperial table. You're about to encounter a flavor so intense, so unique, that it might just redefine your understanding of Byzantine taste. Imagine a sauce made from fish entrails, small whole fish, or even larger pieces, left to ferment under the sun in large vats with salt for weeks, even months. The enzymes in the fish would break down the proteins, creating a liquid rich in amino acids, delivering an incredibly savory, intensely salty, and deeply umami flavor. This was the ancient equivalent of soy sauce fish sauce and Worcestershire sauce, all rolled into one, but with its own distinct, powerful character. While some might describe the initial aroma as, shall we say, robust, to the point of off-putting, the resulting liquid, when properly prepared and aged, was highly prized. Garum was not just a condiment, it was an ingredient. It was added to almost everything: stews, sauces, vegetables, even some bread doughs. It provided a depth of flavor that was otherwise difficult to achieve in an era without modern flavor enhancers. It was a secret weapon of the Byzantine chef, a background note that harmonized and amplified all the other ingredients. You probably won't even realize you're tasting it directly, but its presence would be subtly enriching every savory bite. There were different grades of garum, from the highly prized clear golden liquid, often from mackerel or tuna, that would have graced the imperial table, to coarser, thicker varieties used in more common households. The most expensive types were sometimes infused with herbs, spices, or even wine, creating a more refined product. A quirky tidbit: the smell of a garum factory, particularly on a hot summer day, was famously foul, leading to them being located far outside populated areas. So while the end product was a luxury, its production was definitely not. Historians still argue about the exact prevalence and types of garum used in Byzantine cuisine, as tastes evolved over the empire's long history. While its use was widespread in earlier Roman times, its exact continuation and prominence in later Byzantine periods is a subject of scholarly debate. However, it's clear that fermented fish products in some form remained an important part of the culinary landscape. The Byzantines certainly enjoyed strong flavors, and garum delivered that in spades. So, as you sample a dish and find yourself wondering what exactly gives it that incredibly savory, almost meaty depth, even without obvious meat, there's a good chance it's the ghost of garum working its magic. It's a taste that connects you directly to the ancient world, a testament to culinary resourcefulness, and a palate that embraced intensity. It might be challenging to fully appreciate without the benefit of a time-traveling nose, but its historical significance to the Byzantine feast is undeniable. Just try not to overthink the origin story while you're enjoying the complex flavors. With the lingering umami-rich notes of garum slowly fading, your attention is drawn to the sheer scope of the imperial experience. This isn't just a series of courses. This is an event, a marathon of consumption and spectacle. We are now talking about the imperial banquet's grand scale. These were not quick dinners. They were multi-hour, sometimes multi-day affairs designed to overwhelm the senses, demonstrate boundless wealth, and cement political alliances through sheer joyous and sometimes exhausting indulgence. You're not just attending a meal, you're participating in a prolonged theatrical performance of power. Imagine the sheer number of guests. While daily meals might have been smaller, grand banquets could host hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals. Foreign ambassadors, high-ranking military commanders, senators, bishops, favored eunuchs, and even selected scholars would fill the vast halls, each meticulously placed according to their rank and importance. The logistics alone of seating, feeding, and entertaining such a multitude would make a modern event planner weep. It was a testament to the Byzantine administration's organizational prowess, a perfectly orchestrated symphony of service and consumption. The number of dishes served was equally staggering. Forget your typical three-course meal. Imperial banquets would feature dozens, perhaps even scores of different dishes presented in waves. As one set of platters was cleared, another equally elaborate would appear. From roasted whole animals to intricate pastries, from spiced wines to refreshing fruit concoctions, the food seemed to flow endlessly. This abundance was not just about satisfying hunger. It was a potent visual symbol of the empire's limitless resources and the emperor's generosity. Historians still argue whether all dishes were truly consumed or if many were merely for display, but the sheer quantity points to a culture of immense culinary excess. These banquets weren't just about eating and drinking, they were extended social and political events. Discussions would unfold, alliances would be forged or subtly undermined, and messages would be conveyed often through carefully chosen gestures or the presentation of specific gifts. The atmosphere would have been a buzzing tapestry of languages, hushed conversations, and the general murmur of a large assembly. A quirky tidbit, sometimes feasts might even move between different halls within the palace, offering a change of scenery and providing new, unexpected theatrical reveals, like a progressive dinner party on a monumental scale. The entertainment, which we'll delve into more deeply soon, would be continuous musicians, dancers, acrobats, and perhaps even storytellers or poets. These performances weren't mere background noise, they were integral to the experience designed to captivate and distract, adding another layer to the sensory overload. The combined effect of the lavish setting, the endless flow of food and drink, and the constant entertainment would leave guests feeling both satiated and overwhelmed, a potent combination designed to reinforce the emperor's power. So as you stretch slightly on your cushion, perhaps feeling a little full despite only being partway through this grand event, take a moment to absorb the scale. This isn't just dinner, it's an endurance test of luxury, a living, breathing testament to an empire that understood the power of grandiosity. It's a reminder that in Byzantium, even leisure was a serious business conducted on a truly epic scale. Just try not to fall asleep. You might miss the next round of exotic delicacies. You've felt the sheer scale of the imperial banquets, the endless flow of food and drink designed to dazzle and impress. But a feast of this magnitude, lasting for hours on end, needed more than just food to hold the attention of its esteemed guests. It required constant stimulation, a carefully curated atmosphere that seamlessly blended dining with delight. This brings us to the crucial element of monotone, musical interludes, and entertainment at meals. These weren't mere background distractions. They were integral components of the imperial experience designed to enchant, elevate, and sometimes subtly convey messages. Imagine the soft strumming of a lyre or a zither, its ancient melodies weaving through the murmurs of conversation. Then perhaps the reedy wail of an aulus, a double reed pipe, or the gentle swell of voices in a hymn. Music was omnipresent. It might be performed by a small ensemble, positioned discreetly, or by a larger group of professional musicians who would take center stage for specific performances. This wasn't background elevator music. It was live, evocative, and sometimes deeply emotional drawing on both secular and sacred traditions. Historians still argue about the exact forms of Byzantine secular music, as liturgical chants are much better preserved, but accounts suggest a rich tapestry of sounds accompanied imperial life. But music was just one thread in this tapestry of entertainment. Between courses or during lulls in conversation, other performers would emerge. You might witness dancers, perhaps graceful and flowing, performing traditional or more exotic movements. Some accounts even describe acrobats or jugglers, adding a more thrilling, visually dynamic element to the proceedings. These performances weren't just for amusement. They were often seen as a reflection of the empire's cosmopolitan nature, drawing on diverse cultural influences from across its vast territories. Then there were the more intellectual forms of entertainment. Poets might recite epic verses or impromptu odes to the emperor's glory, their voices soaring through the hall. Storytellers might captivate the audience with tales of ancient heroes, mythical beasts, or humorous anecdotes. These acts served not only to entertain but also to showcase the intellectual and cultural sophistication of the Byzantine court, a subtle reminder that this was an empire that valued both military might and artistic refinement. A quirky tidbit, sometimes debates or rhetorical challenges, might take place, allowing certain scholars or dignitaries to demonstrate their wit and knowledge, turning the banquet into a kind of intellectual salon. Imagine trying to enjoy your peacock while someone's passionately dissecting Aristotle. The timing and nature of the entertainment would be meticulously planned. It was all part of the grand imperial protocol designed to maintain a sense of awe and engagement throughout the lengthy feasts. From the gentle background music that accompanied the initial courses to the more energetic performances that might invigorate guests as the night wore on, every element was carefully considered. The goal was to ensure that not a single moment felt dull or uninspired. So, as you hear the distant strains of a Byzantine melody, perhaps accompanied by the rhythmic movements of a dancer, allow yourself to be transported by this multi-sensory spectacle. It's a testament to an empire that understood the power of ambiance, where food for the body was always accompanied by nourishment for the soul, or at least a good show. It reminds you that the Byzantines truly believed in making every moment, especially at the imperial table, utterly unforgettable. Having been serenaded by musicians and captivated by dancers, your mind might instinctively wander to popular misconceptions about ancient feasting. And this brings us to a crucial point of clarification. Vomitorium's myth versus reality. Let's clear the air right now, because if you're picturing Roman nobles excusing themselves from the imperial Byzantine table to purge and make room for more peacock, you've been watching too many historical dramas, and probably the wrong ones. The term vomitorium is one of history's most persistent and pervasive misinterpretations. In reality, a vomitorium was simply an architectural feature in ancient Roman amphitheaters and theaters designed for efficient crowd management. It referred to a wide-arched passageway through which large crowds could vomit forth. From the Latin vomere, to spew or discharge into or out of the seating areas quickly. It had absolutely nothing to do with people intentionally regurgitating their meals. Zero zip nada. So, at a Byzantine banquet, you would not have seen guests excusing themselves to a specially designated room for strategic self-purging. While overindulgence certainly happened, these were multi-hour feasts with abundant food and wine after all. The idea of a dedicated facility for such a purpose is pure fiction born from a linguistic misunderstanding. The Byzantines, despite their love for extravagance, were also deeply conscious of decorum and piety. Such a practice would have been considered crude, undignified, and certainly not something that would take place within the refined halls of the imperial palace. Historians still argue about the precise level of gluttony at these feasts, but systematic purging facilities are definitely out. Now, does that mean no one ever overate or drank too much? Of course not. Humans are humans, and too much spiced wine can lead to regrettable decisions. But any such indiscretions would have been personal affairs handled discreetly and certainly not facilitated by the architectural design of the palace. The Byzantines valued self-control and moderation even amidst their displays of abundance. The goal was to impress and entertain, not to encourage grotesque excess. A quirky tidbit: some Roman satirical writers did occasionally mention individuals who ate to excess and then purged, but this was always depicted as a sign of personal failing or gluttony, not as a normalized or institutionalized practice. It was seen as vulgar, not vogue. The persistence of the vomitorium myth likely stems from a combination of sensationalized popular culture, a misunderstanding of Latin, and perhaps a general fascination with the perceived decadence of ancient empires. It's a much more dramatic story to imagine people feasting to the point of purging rather than simply having a very long, very rich meal. But when you're reclining on those plush cushions surrounded by golden automatons and the murmur of hydraulic fountains, The last thing you'd want is the unpleasant reality of such a practice. So, as you continue to navigate the culinary wonders of the Byzantine court, rest assured that any discomfort you feel is likely from too much honeyed pastry or rich game meat, not from the impending need to visit a non-existent vomitorium. The only thing being vomited forth in this context would be the guests politely exiting through the grand arched doorways when the feast finally mercifully concludes. It's a good reminder that not everything sensationalized in history is actually true. With the myth of the vomitorium definitively debunked, your gaze naturally falls upon the very implements that bring these strange feasts to life on the table. We're talking about the dazzling and often priceless golden plates dining ware. In the Byzantine court, even the act of holding a spoon or sipping from a cup was an encounter with unparalleled luxury, a constant reminder of imperial wealth and divine favor. You're about to appreciate that your basic cutlery set at home looks positively Spartan by comparison. The emperor and his inner circle would dine using objects that were less dinnerware and more works of art. Imagine platters of solid gold shimmering with an inner light, perhaps intricately engraved with religious symbols or imperial eagles. Goblets weren't just functional, they were often miniature sculptures encrusted with precious jewels, rubies, emerald sapphires, catching the light from the polycandela and casting a kaleidoscope of colors. Even the spoons and knives, though perhaps more utilitarian in shape, would be crafted from gold or gilded silver, often with handles fashioned from ivory-polished gems or intricately carved wood. This wasn't just about eating, it was about holding a piece of the empire's treasury in your hand with every bite. These golden vessels served multiple purposes beyond mere utility. Firstly, they were an undeniable display of yuba, wealth and prestige. To host a banquet where every dish was served on gold and every guest of honor drank from jeweled chalices sent an unmistakable message to both internal courtiers and foreign dignitaries. This empire was immeasurably rich, divinely blessed, and utterly unparalleled. It was a tangible manifestation of imperial power more potent than any spoken word. Historians still argue about the exact proportion of solid gold versus gilded bronze or silver used in the daily operations of the court versus ceremonial events, but the perception of overwhelming opulence was consistently maintained. Secondly, they were a testament to the skill of Byzantine artisans. The empire was renowned for its craftsmanship in metallurgy, enameling, and gem setting. These dining wares were not mass-produced. Each piece would have been painstakingly created by master goldsmiths and jewelers, often working within the palace workshops or under imperial patronage. The level of detail, the precision of the engraving, and the flawless setting of the stones spoke volumes about the artistic sophistication of Constantinople. A quirky tidbit, some of these pieces were so elaborate they might have had small specific functions. A tiny spout for pouring a precise amount of sauce, or a handle specifically designed for a certain grip, hinting at an almost ritualistic approach to dining. While the highest-ranking individuals enjoyed these golden splendors, guests of slightly lower rank would still experience luxury, albeit on a slightly less dazzling scale. Finely crafted silver platters, elegant ceramic bowls adorned with intricate designs, and beautifully blown glass goblets would have been used. The commitment to aesthetic beauty and high-quality materials permeated all levels of imperial dining. So as a golden spoon, perhaps heavier than you expect, is placed beside your dish, take a moment to appreciate the centuries of craftsmanship and the colossal wealth it represents. You're not just about to scoop up a delicious stew, you're holding a piece of Byzantine history, a glittering symbol of an empire that spared no expense in showcasing its power and glory even at the dinner table. Just try not to drop it. It's probably worth more than your house. With the gleam of golden plates still dancing in your vision, it becomes clear that Byzantine feasts were about far more than simply satisfying hunger or displaying wealth. Every element, from the mechanical lions to the very utensils, was imbued with deeper meaning. This brings us to the fascinating realm of symbolic foods, meaningful meals. In the Byzantine court, food was often a language in itself, carrying political messages, religious allegories, or social statements beyond its mere nutritional value. You're about to discover that sometimes what you ate was less important than what it represented. Imagine a dish prepared with a specific type of fish or meat that was historically significant, perhaps commemorating a military victory or a dynastic marriage. For example, the use of certain types of fish during Lenten periods beyond simple religious adherence could symbolize piety and the spiritual strength of the empire. Or the prominent display of specific fruits like pomegranates, which were ancient symbols of fertility and prosperity, could convey a message of hope and abundance for the empire's future. It was food as a narrative, a delicious allegory. A common example of symbolic food use would have been during coronation banquets or celebrations of major military triumphs. A particularly grand roasted animal, perhaps a boar, or even a stuffed and re-feathered peacock, wouldn't just be a meal. It would be the embodiment of the emperor's strength and success, literally a trophy brought to the table. The act of carving and distributing such a piece might have been a ritualistic affirmation of imperial power and generosity. Historians still argue about the extent to which these symbolic interpretations were explicitly understood by all guests, versus being primarily for the educated elite, but the visual cues would have been undeniable. Religious symbolism permeated much of Byzantine life, and food was no exception. During Christian festivals, specific foods might be prepared to reflect biblical stories or theological concepts. For instance, the use of leavened bread in the Eucharist, in contrast to the unleavened bread of Western Christianity, was a point of theological and symbolic significance for the Byzantines, representing the fullness of the Holy Spirit. While this applies more to liturgical practices than everyday feasts, the broader concept of food as a vehicle for sacred meaning was deeply ingrained. A quirky tidbit, sometimes the rarity of an ingredient itself could be symbolic. The sheer presence of exotic spices from distant lands or rare fruits from newly acquired territories could subtly boast of the empire's vast reach and successful trade networks. It was a way of saying, look what the emperor commands. His influence stretches to the very ends of the earth. The very act of consuming these global ingredients became a participation in the empire's power. So as you lift a morsel to your lips, perhaps a piece of that magnificent roasted boar or a sweet honeyed fig, consider not just its taste, but its unspoken story. You're not just consuming calories, you're participating in a centuries-old tradition where food transcended mere sustenance to become a powerful tool for communication, a delicious testament to the layered meanings of Byzantine court life. It's a reminder that in this empire, even the menu was a political statement. Having explored the hidden meanings within symbolic foods, your journey through the Byzantine feast now takes a more austere, yet equally significant turn. For all the lavish indulgence, the Byzantine court was first and foremost deeply religious, and this faith profoundly shaped their culinary calendar. We now delve into fasting rituals, religious observance, and how they dramatically reshaped the imperial menu. You're about to see how piety could dictate abstinence even from the most tantalizing imperial delights. For the Byzantines particularly, those adhering strictly to Orthodox Christian practices, fasting was not just an occasional act of piety. It was a regular, rigorous discipline observed for significant portions of the year. This wasn't about skipping a meal or two. It was about abstaining from specific food groups, primarily meat, dairy products, milk, cheese, eggs, butter, and sometimes fish or olive oil for extended periods. The most prominent of these fasting seasons was Great Lent. The 40 days leading up to Easter, but there were also numerous other fast days throughout the week, Wednesdays and Fridays, and additional fasting periods before major feast days, like Christmas, the Dormition of the Theotokos, and the feast of Saints Peter and Paul. During these times, the imperial kitchen, which typically reveled in its abundance, would undergo a dramatic transformation. The roaring fires for roasting meats would die down, and the dairy stores would remain untouched. Instead, the focus would shift entirely to plant-based ingredients, and on some fasting days, fish. This meant a heavy reliance on pulses like lentils, chickpeas, and beans, as well as a vast array of vegetables, grains, and fruits. Dishes would be prepared with olive oil if permitted, or simply boiled or baked with water and herbs. You'd find hearty vegetable stews, elaborate salads, diverse bread varieties without dairy, and a greater emphasis on nuts and dried fruits for sustenance. The challenge for the imperial chefs during these periods was immense: how to create a sense of imperial grandeur and sophisticated dining within such strict limitations. They had to be incredibly creative to ensure variety and flavor without resorting to the usual luxurious ingredients. This often led to the development of highly ingenious vegetarian and vegan dishes that were far from bland. Spices, as always, would play a crucial role in adding depth and complexity to these otherwise simple ingredients. Historians still argue about the exact rigor with which all members of the imperial court adhered to these fasts, but the public display of adherence by the emperor was paramount. A quirky tidbit on certain particularly strict fasting days, known as xerophagy, dry eating, even olive oil, was forbidden. Meals would consist primarily of uncooked fruits, vegetables, bread, and water. Imagine an entire imperial banquet where the only moisture comes from a crisp apple and a glass of water, a stark contrast to the usual flowing wine and rich sauces. This level of asceticism, even for a short period, was a profound statement of faith. So, as you contemplate the vibrant, albeit meat-free dishes that might grace the imperial table during a Lenten period, you gain a deeper understanding of the Byzantine psyche. This wasn't just about food, it was about spiritual discipline, a public demonstration of piety, and a profound connection to the divine. The strange feasts of Byzantium were just as much defined by what they abstained from as by what they indulged in, proving that even restriction could be transformed into a unique culinary expression. It's a good reminder that every grand feast eventually comes with its necessary period of penance. From the disciplined adherence to fasting rituals, we now descend from the rarefied air of the imperial palace and take a stroll through the bustling, vibrant streets of Constantinople. Here we can catch glimpses of how some of the grand culinary ideas of the court might have echoed, albeit in simpler forms, in the everyday lives of ordinary Byzantines. This brings us to Street Food Echoes, Popular Bites, where the luxury of the palace met the practicalities of urban life. You're about to see that even the common folk had their own version of fast food, sometimes hinting at imperial inspirations. Imagine the narrow, winding streets of the city teeming with merchants, artisans, and laborers. The air would be filled with a cacophony of sounds and a rich tapestry of smells: roasting meats, freshly baked bread, simmering stews, and the distinctive aroma of various spices. While the common citizen couldn't dream of golden platters or mechanical lions, they still ate well, and much of their food was consumed on the go from street vendors or small taverns. One of the most ubiquitous street foods would have been various forms of bread. While not as refined as the imperial white loaves, common bread, often made from coarser grains like barley or rye, would have been the foundation of many meals. Bakers would have sold fresh loaves from small shops, and you might see vendors selling savory pastries. Filled with cheese, herbs, or even ground meat, much like a modern borek or samosa. These would have been quick, portable, and satisfying. Historians still argue about the exact composition of these popular pastries, but their widespread consumption is well documented. Beyond baked goods, simple hearty stews or porridges often made from lentils, chickpeas, or various vegetables would have been sold from large cauldrons. These provided cheap and nutritious sustenance for the working classes. you might find a vendor dishing out a steaming bowl of lentil soup. Seasoned with olive oil and herbs, a far cry from the rich spiced game stews of the court, but equally comforting. A quirky tidbit, dried fruits and nuts like figs, dates and walnuts would have been widely available from street vendors serving as natural portable snacks, much as they do today in some parts of the Mediterranean. For those who could afford a little more roasted meats, would have been a popular indulgence. Small skewers of grilled lamb or pork, seasoned simply with salt and pepper, might have been sold from street stalls, their savory aroma drawing hungry passers-by. While not entire roasted boars, these smaller cuts offered a taste of the imperial love for meat. And, of course, fish would have been readily available, especially in a city surrounded by water. Fried or grilled fish, perhaps served with a squeeze of lemon or a sprinkle of salt, would have been a common and affordable meal. These popular bites highlight the ingenuity of ordinary Byzantines in adapting the available ingredients to their daily needs and budgets. While the court feasted on exotic imports, the common folk relied on local produce cleverly prepared. Yet the underlying culinary principles, the love of fresh ingredients, the clever use of spices, even if more sparingly, and the importance of bread, resonated throughout all levels of society. So, as you imagine the lively markets and the tempting smells wafting from street stalls, you get a sense of how the grand culinary traditions of the Byzantine court filtered down, becoming accessible in simpler forms to the masses. It's a reminder that even in an empire of extreme opulence, good food in some form was a universal pleasure. Just try not to jostle the vendors. They're probably already stressed enough. From the bustling, earthy aromas of Constantinople's street food, we ascend once more to the rarefied atmosphere of the imperial palace, where meals often transcended mere sustenance to become acts of diplomacy. This brings us to foreign guests' diplomatic dinners, where the Byzantine court used its culinary prowess not just to feed, but to impress, to flatter, and sometimes to subtly assert dominance over visiting dignitaries. You're about to witness how a banquet could be a battleground of soft power fought with forks and goblets. Imagine an ambassador from a distant land, perhaps a Frankish king's envoy, a Viking chieftain, or a dignitary from the Abbasid Caliphate, entering the Magnara. They would already be overwhelmed by the golden splendor, the mechanical marvels, and the elaborate protocol we've discussed. The feast itself was the grand finale, designed to leave an indelible impression of the Byzantine Empire's immense wealth, sophistication, and formidable power. Every dish, every sip, every piece of entertainment was a calculated move in a complex game of international relations. The sheer abundance of food would have been a shock to many foreign visitors, particularly those from less prosperous lands. While they might be accustomed to feasting the variety and sheer quantity of exotic ingredients, the endless courses and the constant flow of wine would have been designed to dazzle. It was a visual and gustatory demonstration that Byzantium possessed resources far beyond anything their own rulers could command. "Look upon our bounty," the feast silently proclaimed, "and understand our might." Historians still argue about the precise details of certain diplomatic exchanges, but the accounts of awe from foreign envoys are consistent. Beyond mere quantity, the specific dishes served could also carry a message. Presenting a dish made with a rare spice from India, for example, subtly highlighted the empire's control over vital trade routes. Offering a particularly fine wine from a newly reconquered province could underscore imperial expansion. The quality and presentation were paramount. Every meal was a carefully curated experience demonstrating not just wealth, but also refined taste and cultural superiority. A quirky tidbit, sometimes gifts would be presented during the banquet, adding another layer to the diplomatic spectacle. Imagine an envoy receiving a priceless silk robe or a bejeweled sword right there at the dinner table between courses of roasted pheasant. Talk about multitasking. The seating arrangements, the order of service, and even the emperor's own demeanor at the table were all part of this diplomatic dance. An emperor might choose to engage in seemingly casual conversation with a particular envoy, elevating their status in the eyes of their peers. Or a particularly lavish dish might be personally offered by a high-ranking courtier to a hesitant ambassador, a gesture of goodwill designed to ease tensions or encourage agreement. These were not just meals, they were carefully orchestrated negotiations conducted under the guise of hospitality. So as you observe the foreign envoys perhaps looking a little bewildered amidst the opulence and strange customs, remember that for them this isn't just dinner. It's a critical moment in their mission where every bite, every glance, and every whispered word holds significance. The Byzantine court understood that the way to a diplomat's mind, and perhaps their ruler's acquiescence, was often through their stomach, garnished with a generous helping of awe. It's a powerful reminder that in the ancient world, even eating was a geopolitical act. Having witnessed the intricate choreography of diplomatic dinners, where food was a silent language of power, your focus now shifts to a more personal yet equally influential aspect of the Byzantine imperial table, the advice sometimes unwelcome of the medical establishment. This brings us to Waristu, physicians' orders, diet, and health. In an era long before modern nutrition science, imperial physicians played a significant role in advising on diet, believing that food held the key to well-being even amidst the court's legendary indulgence. You're about to discover that even emperors had to contend with the ancient equivalent of a dietary consultant. Byzantine medicine was heavily influenced by the ancient Greek theories of Hippocrates and Galen, particularly the concept of humoral balance. This theory posited that the human body was composed of four primary humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, and that health depended on the proper balance of these humors. Food was considered a powerful tool for maintaining or restoring this balance. Thus, imperial physicians weren't just on hand for emergencies. They were proactive advisors meticulously studying the emperor's constitution, lifestyle, and even the changing seasons to recommend specific dietary regimens. Imagine the imperial physician, a learned man or occasionally woman, though less commonly at court, meticulously observing the emperor's complexion, pulse, and general disposition. They would then offer detailed advice on what foods to eat, what to avoid, and in what quantities. For instance, certain hot foods might be prescribed for a cold constitution and vice versa. Rich fatty meats might be balanced with acidic fruits or vegetables to aid digestion. Wine, as we've discussed, was often diluted partly on the advice of physicians who believed excessive, undiluted consumption disrupted humoral balance. Historians still argue about the actual effectiveness of these humoral diets, but their theoretical framework was incredibly influential for centuries. This meant that even at the most lavish banquet, the emperor might be subtly guided by his physician's recommendations. While he wouldn't refuse a dish outright without good reason, his choices might be informed by his current humoral state. A quirky tidbit, some physicians even advised on the best time of day to eat certain foods, or the order in which courses should be consumed, believing that proper digestion was paramount to overall health. It was like having a personal health guru constantly lurking ready to offer dietary pronouncements. The inclusion of specific ingredients in a dish might also reflect a physician's influence. Spices, as we've noted, were often valued for their perceived medicinal properties. A chef might be instructed to use more ginger if the emperor was feeling cold, or more saffron if his spirits needed lifting. The kitchen, therefore, wasn't just a place of culinary creation. It was in part an extension of the imperial infirmary, producing food that was both delicious and theoretically therapeutic. So as you observe the emperor partaking in the feast, remember that his choices might not be purely gastronomic. Behind the scenes, the watchful eye of his physician, armed with centuries of medical theory, was undoubtedly influencing his plate. It's a fascinating insight into a time when food medicine and power were inextricably linked, And even the ruler of the known world had to sometimes listen to the stern advice of his doctor, especially if he wanted to enjoy the next grand feast without an upset stomach. From the watchful eyes of imperial physicians dictating dietary regimens, our journey through the Byzantine feast now shifts to a poignant realization much of this culinary world is tantalizingly out of reach. This brings us to Recipes, Lost Culinary Mystery. Despite the empire's long history and meticulous record-keeping in other areas, detailed Byzantine cookbooks, in the way we understand them today, are remarkably scarce. You're about to confront the frustrating challenge historians face in trying to truly taste the past. Imagine trying to recreate a dish from 1,000 years ago with only a few cryptic references. That's often the reality for Byzantine cuisine. Unlike ancient Rome, which left us with Apicius's De Re Coquinaria, or later medieval Europe with its more numerous recipe collections, the Byzantine Empire produced very few dedicated culinary texts that offer comprehensive instructions. What we have are tantalizing fragments, mentions in historical chronicles, descriptions by foreign travelers, medical treatises, discussing ingredients and their properties, or very brief, almost poetic allusions in literary works. These are clues, not step-by-step guides. This scarcity creates a profound culinary mystery. We know what ingredients were available thanks to trade records and archaeological finds. We know how some foods were prepared in general terms, roasting, boiling, baking. But the specific proportions, the nuanced techniques, the precise layering of flavors that made a dish truly Byzantine. Much of that knowledge has simply vanished into the mists of time. Historians still argue about the precise flavors and textures of many Byzantine dishes, leading to educated guesswork and lively debates. A quirky tidbit: some of the closest things we have to recipes are often embedded within medical texts, where specific preparations of food are recommended for health. For example, a doctor might describe how to prepare a certain gruel or a chicken broth, noting its benefits. While these aren't haute cuisine, they offer valuable insights into ingredient combinations and preparation methods, hinting at the underlying culinary principles. It's like trying to learn gourmet cooking from a homeopathic pharmacy manual. The reasons for this scarcity are complex. Perhaps culinary knowledge was primarily an oral tradition passed down from master chef to apprentice rather than written down. Perhaps cookbooks, if they existed, were considered ephemeral, less important than theological treatises or historical chronicles, and thus were not meticulously copied and preserved through the centuries. Or perhaps the ravages of time fires and sackings, like the infamous Fourth Crusade, simply destroyed what once existed. Whatever the reason, it leaves modern enthusiasts with a delicious void to fill with informed speculation. So as you ponder the strange and wonderful dishes you've encountered, remember that much of their exact taste profile remains elusive. We can infer, we can guess, and we can make educated attempts at recreation. But the true, authentic flavor of a Byzantine imperial feast is a secret held by history itself. It's a bittersweet thought to be so close to such opulence, yet forever separated from its precise taste. It reminds you that even the most well-documented empires can hold on to their delicious secrets. As we lament the lost recipes that leave so much of the Byzantine feast to our imagination, it's also important to acknowledge that even within the empire's 1,000-year span, nothing remained static. The grandeur and extravagance of the imperial table, while legendary, did not always remain at its zenith. This brings us to the post-decline of decadence later eras. Observing how the nature of imperial feasts evolved and possibly diminished in scale during the empire's later, more tumultuous centuries, you're about to see how political fortunes directly impacted the menu. Imagine the lavish banquets described earlier, filled with golden automatons and endless courses of exotic foods. These descriptions largely stem from the empire's periods of prosperity and strength, particularly during the Macedonian and Comnenian dynasties, roughly 9th to 12th centuries, when Byzantium was a dominant power, rich from trade and strong militarily. This was the empire at its confident, opulent peak, willing and able to invest vast resources into projecting its image through magnificent feasts. However, as the centuries wore on, particularly after the devastating impact of the Fourth Crusade in 1204, when Constantinople was sacked by Western Crusaders, a truly bewildering turn of events, and the subsequent fragmentation of the empire, the resources available for such extravagant displays diminished significantly. The empire that re-established itself was a shadow of its former self, constantly battling external threats, losing territory, and struggling with its economy. Naturally, this had a profound impact on the imperial table. Feasts in the later Paleologan period, 13th to 15th centuries, would still have been impressive by contemporary European standards, but they likely could not match the dizzying opulence of earlier eras. The emphasis would have shifted from pure, unadulterated extravagance to a more measured display of dignity and tradition given the strained circumstances. Exotic imports might have become rarer and more expensive, forcing chefs to rely more on local produce and less on far-flung luxuries. The number of courses might have shrunk, and the sheer scale of guests might have been reduced. Historians still argue about the precise degree of this decline, as sources from later periods are also scarcer, but the trend towards greater frugality is generally accepted. A quirky tidbit: during these leaner times, the symbolic importance of food might have become even more pronounced. A single rare spice or a carefully presented, locally sourced delicacy might have carried even more weight than a multitude of dishes, precisely because it demonstrated continued access to luxuries despite hardship. It became about quality over quantity, and often about making a virtue out of necessity. Imagine savoring a single perfectly roasted partridge, knowing that the empire's coffers aren't what they once were, but the spirit of imperial dining endures. The mechanical marvels, if they survived the sackings and periods of neglect, would likely have fallen into disrepair, too expensive or too complex to maintain. The golden plates might have been melted down for coin in times of dire need. The continuous flow of entertainment might have become less frequent, reserved only for the most critical diplomatic encounters. So as you reflect on the full arc of the Byzantine Empire, from its dazzling heights to its prolonged twilight, remember that its feasts mirrored its fortunes. While the early centuries presented an almost fantastical culinary wonderland, the later period saw a more restrained, yet still dignified approach to imperial dining. It's a reminder that even the grandest traditions must sometimes bow to the relentless march of history, even if they leave behind the delicious echoes of their former glory. Having witnessed the ebb and flow of imperial opulence through the centuries, our ability to reconstruct these strange Byzantine feasts, despite the loss of detailed recipes, relies heavily on the diligent work of scholars poring over scattered mentions. This brings us to Surviving Texts: Historical Clues. The invaluable primary sources, chronicles, and travelogues that offer tantalizing glimpses into the imperial dining experience. You're about to appreciate the painstaking detective work involved in piecing together a culinary past from often indirect evidence. Imagine historians sifting through mountains of ancient parchment, not specifically looking for recipes, but for any mention, however fleeting, of food meals or dining customs. Their clues come from a variety of sources. First, and perhaps most vividly, are the chronicles and histories, written by Byzantine authors themselves. Men like Procopius, Michael Psellos, Anna Komnene, and John Kinemos, in their grand narratives of emperors' wars and political intrigue, often included descriptions of imperial ceremonies, including banquets. These accounts, while not culinary guides, provide crucial details about the setting, the participants, and sometimes even the specific dishes or the general atmosphere of the feasts. They give us a sense of the event of dining. Then there are the foreign travelogues and diplomatic reports. Visitors from other lands, Frankish envoys, Arab chroniclers, or Russ's dignitaries would often be deeply impressed or occasionally repulsed by the lavishness of the Byzantine court. Their written accounts intended for their own rulers or for a wider audience back home often contain detailed descriptions of the food, the serving rituals, and the mechanical marvels. These outside perspectives are invaluable because they often highlight precisely what was unusual or extraordinary about Byzantine feasts from a non-Byzantine viewpoint. For example, Liutprand of Cremona's vivid and often exasperated descriptions of the court of Constantine VII provide some of the best insights into the mechanical lions and throne of Solomon. Historians still argue about the inherent biases and exaggerations in some of these foreign accounts, but they remain indispensable. Medical texts, as we touched upon, also offer surprising culinary insights. Treatises on dietetics like those by the physician Aetius of Amida, or the anonymous Geoponica, an agricultural encyclopedia, provide information on ingredients, their perceived properties, and methods of preparation, albeit from a health-focused perspective rather than a gastronomic one. These texts are vital for understanding the raw materials available and the underlying principles of food preparation. A quirky tidbit, even monastic rules and lives of saints, can offer clues describing the strict fasts observed or the simple meals eaten, providing a stark contrast to the imperial indulgence and highlighting the range of culinary practices within the empire. Finally, administrative records, trade documents, and archaeological findings, like pottery remains or organic residues, can offer supporting evidence confirming the presence of certain ingredients or the types of vessels used for dining. While they don't tell us about recipes, they help paint a fuller picture of the material culture of food. So, as you consider the strange feasts of the Byzantine court, remember the silent dedication of the scholars who, like culinary detectives, sift through these scattered textual fragments and material clues. It's through their meticulous work that we can even begin to glimpse the outlines of this lost gastronomic world, piecing together the aromas, the tastes, and the sheer spectacle of a Byzantine imperial banquet, one tantalizing crumb of evidence at a time. It's a reminder that even whispers from the past can tell a rich story if you know how to listen. Having peered into the historical texts that serve as our windows to the past, the logical next step for many curious minds is to try and bridge that gap. This brings us to High Modern Recreations Tasting the Past. In recent years, historians, chefs, and culinary enthusiasts have embarked on fascinating attempts to resurrect Byzantine dishes, using the fragmented clues we possess to bring these strange feasts quite literally to life. You're about to explore the challenges and triumphs of trying to taste something that hasn't been prepared in centuries. Imagine a modern kitchen, perhaps with gleaming stainless steel, but filled with ingredients that would have been familiar to a Byzantine chef: lentils, chickpeas, various grains, an array of spices, olive oil, and fresh produce. The task is to take a vague description, say a stew of lamb with fragrant spices and sour plums, and translate it into a tangible edible dish. This requires not just culinary skill, but a deep understanding of historical context, probable techniques, and the available ingredients. It's like being a culinary archaeologist, digging for flavors. The process often involves a lot of experimentation and educated guesswork. Since precise measurements and cooking times are almost non-existent, chefs must rely on their intuition knowledge of ancient cooking methods and a willingness to embrace flavors that might seem unusual to a modern palate. For instance, the heavy use of vinegar alongside sweet elements or the pervasive presence of garum can be challenging to balance in a way that feels authentic but also appealing to contemporary tastes. Historians still argue about the best approach to such recreations should they prioritize authenticity, even if the result is challenging or adapt for modern palatability. A quirky tidbit that often emerges during these recreations is the surprise at how flavorful and sophisticated some of these dishes could be, even with seemingly simple ingredients. The Byzantine mastery of spices, their understanding of slow cooking, and their clever combinations of sweet, sour, and savory elements can produce truly delicious results. You might try a recreated lentil dish that, far from being bland, is bursting with the warmth of cinnamon and the tang of verjuice, unripe grape juice, a common ancient souring agent. Some culinary historians even attempt to use period-appropriate cooking vessels and methods, cooking over open fires using clay pots or relying on fermentation processes to get as close as possible to the authentic experience. This isn't just about cooking, it's about experiential history, a hands-on approach to understanding a lost culture through its food. It's a bit like a historical reenactment, but for your taste buds. These modern recreations serve a vital purpose beyond just satisfying curiosity. They help scholars better understand the practicalities of ancient food preparation, the logistical challenges, and the sensory experiences of the past. They turn abstract historical descriptions into tangible realities, allowing us to connect with the Byzantines on a remarkably intimate level, through the shared human experience of a meal. So, as you envision a modern chef meticulously chopping herbs or stirring a pot, attempting to channel the ghost of a Byzantine mageiros, you gain a new appreciation for the enduring power of food to connect us across millennia. It's a delicious attempt to break through the veil of time, proving that even lost flavors can sometimes be coaxed back to life, offering a tantalizing, if incomplete, taste of the strangest feasts of the Byzantine court. Just try not to offer any unsolicited cooking advice. They're already doing their best with limited instructions. We've journeyed through the dazzling halls, witnessed mechanical wonders, debated the nature of ancient health advice, and even tasted the educated guesses of modern chefs. Our exploration of the strange feasts of the Byzantine court culminates now in a reflection on their enduring impact, a look at the paean, legacy of luxury, enduring influence. For all their quirks and centuries-old customs, the culinary and ceremonial traditions of Byzantium left an indelible mark, subtly influencing later European courts and shaping our very understanding of imperial grandeur. You're about to see how the echoes of these strange feasts resonated far beyond Constantinople's walls. Imagine the impression a visiting Western European dignitary would have taken home after experiencing a banquet in the Magnora. The sheer scale, the golden splendor, the automatons, the exotic ingredients, and the meticulous protocol were unlike anything most would have encountered in their own comparatively more rustic courts. This was a blueprint for sophisticated power projection, a masterclass in how to use dining as an instrument of statecraft. The very concept of lavish imperial banquets, designed to impress and awe, owes a significant debt to the Byzantine model. Historians still argue about the precise channels of transmission, but the influence is undeniable. Consider the Pascu concept of courtly etiquette. While not solely a Byzantine invention, their meticulous attention to serving protocol, the hierarchical seating, and the overall theatricality of the dining experience provided a powerful example. Later European courts, as they grew in power and sought to emulate the prestige of ancient empires, would adopt and adapt many of these practices. The pomp and circumstance of medieval and Renaissance banquets, with their elaborate presentations and ceremonial aspects, often carried faint echoes of their Byzantine predecessors. A quirky tidbit, the very idea of a formal dinner where specific courses are served in a particular order and guests are seated according to rank, can trace some of its lineage back to the highly structured Byzantine court. The love of exotic ingredients and spices also saw an enduring legacy. The Byzantine Empire's role as a vital hub for the spice trade ensured that these coveted aromatics became increasingly integrated into European cuisine even after the fall of Constantinople. The desire for cinnamon pepper and saffron, once fueled by Byzantine demand, continued to drive exploration and trade, fundamentally altering global culinary landscapes. While the imperial kitchen's direct recipes might be lost, their adventurous spirit and their embrace of global flavors certainly were not. Even the focus on visual presentation. In food, from refeathered peacocks to intricately molded pastries, found echoes in later European culinary traditions. The medieval subtleties, elaborate sugar sculptures, and edible table decorations shared a clear aesthetic lineage with the Byzantine passion for edible art. The idea that food should be a feast for the eyes as well as the palate was a lesson well learned from the Byzantines. So, as you reflect on the fading images of the golden lions, the murmuring fountains, and the endless array of strange and wonderful dishes, understand that these weren't just isolated historical curiosities. They were part of a vibrant, influential culture that, even in its eventual decline, shaped the very fabric of European thought on luxury, power, and the profound art of dining. The strange feasts of the Byzantine court may be long gone, but their legacy, like a lingering exotic spice, continues to flavor the history of gastronomy. Sweet dreams!